Okay, the next section in here is called health-related articles, and so it goes through health-related issues. Um, Again, some of these are going to be more geared towards international, but we also see health-related issues with domestic as well. So it's important to go through this with everybody. Um, the first article in here, don't have to go through thoroughly because it's one for you to kind of review in your own time, but it's a glossary of medical conditions. So it goes through many of the medical conditions and talks about them. If you are in the process during your home study of figuring out what special needs you want to be open to, this article is good for you to review because it can give you some more information on the special needs that we see with children. The only thing I really want to point out in this article is on the very last page it says parasites. I just always like to inform parents because it's not something you're aware of if you haven't traveled much internationally, especially to some of the third world countries, is that a good amount of children adopted from third world countries come home with some kind of intestinal parasite. It says on here Giardia, and that's the one that you see the most. It's a stomach parasite that gets in the child, an intestinal parasite. And it's funny because your child can come home and be exhibiting very few symptoms of it because it's something that they've lived with for who knows how long. But I've had some adults that I know go overseas and get Giardia, and you would think they are dying because they are in so much pain when they come home. But Giardia is easily detected by physicians, and then it's also easily treatable with medication. So it's not something that will impact the child later in life. You just have to treat it and get rid of it. Let's see. The next article is again by Child Welfare Information Gateway, and it is adopting children with developmental disabilities. It's important for families that are adopting, especially from an orphanage setting, to know that it's very likely that your child will have some developmental delays if they're coming from an institutional setting. Just because they haven't had the one-on-one time with adults to develop their abilities like a biological child or a child placed at birth has. That being said, I know when we brought home our son, he was actually ahead in some of the developmental things, just because a lot of times in an orphanage setting, sometimes they have to learn to be more independent more quickly. So our son could feed himself and do all these things at 9 months that I was not prepared for a 9-month-old to be able to do. So this article, I'm not going to go through all of these in depth, but it goes through some of the types of disabilities. It goes through MR, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, spina bifida, AIDS, fetal alcohol syndrome, which we'll talk about more here in a few minutes. And then it talks about the challenges of adopting a child with developmental disabilities. We tell families all the time, kind of prepare for the worst and hope for the best. It's also important to know that the diagnosis your child got overseas, especially if medical care isn't on the same level as American care, the diagnoses that they received over there might not be appropriate diagnosis for them or might not be correct. We've had some children where it just said that they have low muscle tone or something like that, and then they get home and it's cerebral palsy. But on the flip side, we've had it the other way, where a child's diagnosed with cerebral palsy and they get home and it's oh no, they just have low muscle tone. So there's always that risk that it might not be a correct diagnosis. So, on to the next article. The next article is on fetal alcohol syndrome. Fetal alcohol syndrome is the damage that happens to a child in utero when the biological mother ingests alcohol. Unfortunately, it's something that we see a lot of in the adoption community. I will say that you see more of it again in Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, where alcohol is more prevalent, and even some of the Asian countries. You see it more there than you see in some of the South American and African countries. Some of the biggest things that occur with children with fetal alcohol syndrome is that they have, it goes through here, but they have learning disabilities where they struggle. A lot of times you, of course, won't see those until they're more school age. And a lot of the symptoms in general don't come out until they are more school age, and until they get older. But learning disabilities, they usually have some lower IQ levels. They're at risk for more social problems, and knowing how to interact socially. Sometimes it talks here about how sometimes there's a late diagnosis. Sometimes we don't know that children have fetal alcohol syndrome. It says in here, in one study, only 11% of the children with FAS had been diagnosed before the age of 6. So a lot of times you're not until it's older that you know, because the average is age 10 or 11. So FAS is difficult because there's no test that you can perform on a kid to know that they have FAS. There are some physical features with a kid with FAS. Usually they will have a larger area from lip to nose. Usually their eyes will be farther apart and their upper lip will be really, really thin. So there are some physical features, but a child might look like that and might not have FAS. So you can't just look at a kid and be like, oh, they have FAS, because that's not a 100% accurate way of diagnosing them. So a lot of times we look more at the social, intellectual, developmental struggles that they have. Okay, let's see. The next article is on finding the right pediatrician for you. Typically, at this point, I ask a family, do you have a pediatrician yet? And are you happy with your pediatrician? If they have children and they have a pediatrician, they're happy with that pediatrician, then I won't really go over this. I will just say something like, okay, well, if you desire a new pediatrician or a pediatrician, maybe that's more experienced with adopted children, that might be an option for you. But if they haven't yet gotten a pediatrician, then we talk to them about this and about finding the right doctor. I'm a very non-confrontational person, and so the first pediatrician I had, I hated, but I couldn't leave him because then I felt guilty because it was like I was rejecting him. So I don't know. That's my own guilt factor. So then we moved, and so it was a good excuse for me to find a new pediatrician. And I love our new pediatrician. He's great. But I wish I just kind of would have bit the bullet and changed pediatricians before, when I had that bad pediatrician. So, but that's a good article just on finding the right pediatrician. The next article is kind of the same. Tips on finding the right pediatrician, the perfect pediatrician. The next article, it's more of a printout, is a description on the medical coverage for adopted children under the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993. Basically, Bill Clinton, when he was in office, he signed into law the Budget Reconciliation Act, and one of the things under the Budget Reconciliation Act is that every adopted child has to be covered by insurance at the time of placement. So not at the time of adoption finalization, which is really important for domestic families. Your child is covered by your insurance at the time of placement. There are a couple employers and insurances that don't technically have to do this. Like a lot of pastors, sometimes this does not apply to. But pretty much every major insurance agency will follow this. And I always tell families, if your insurance is giving you any kind of pushback, because a lot of times they do, we see it a lot, feel free to print this out for them or make a copy of it and give it to them and be like, no, you're required to cover my child from the time of placement. For families having adoptive placement through us, we provide them with a letter for their insurance too, stating what the date of placement was. The next article in here, I usually just review with, it's Kentucky specific. It's about First Steps in Kentucky and what First Steps looks like and the services they provide. but pretty much every state has a kind of first steps program for children. So the ages differ in every state. In Kentucky, it's birth to 3, so your child can receive some developmental assistance and therapeutic services if your child falls within that range. So that is that one.